So, good afternoon. The question today is, does God exist? And I thought this is a complicated question that people have asked for so many years and for so many decades. And the funny thing is that the answers have always been there. There are no new answers, but I think just the articulation has been different. So let me try it today and see if we can get somewhere, right? So, does God exist? Here are some simple answers to this question. I'll begin from this point, right? The simplest answer to this question, is the correct one. The simplest answer is the correct one. There's no need for complications. We should not complicate things. And this is an argument that was proposed by so many people. I'll start by somebody called, his name was William of Ockham. And he did what is called the Ocker's razor. And this razor says that entities are not to be multiplied without necessity. Do not pile things upon the other if it is not necessary. Just remain with the simplest thing. And that is the correct thing. He was a philosopher and he was a theologian. He was a Franciscan friar. Those guys who wear brown and they tie some stuff on their knee. They wear a robe and then they tie a rope on their hips. So he was one of those guys. And then Aristotle, the teacher of Alexander the Great, he taught Alexander the Great. And he also said, this is what he said, that the explanation, right, with the fewest hypotheses is superior to any other, right? The hypothesis with the simplest explanation with the simplest hypothesis with the fewest is superior. So that's what he said. And then we have somebody called Ptolemy. He was an Egyptian. He was kind of a mathematician, an astronomer, an astrologer, all of those things. And he said that in principle, it is always good to explain phenomena by the simplest hypothesis possible. So this is my argument, that in these complex arguments of religion and God, that the simplest explanation is the correct one. So that's my argument. Again, you cannot take it on face value. It has to be true. And whatever is true is usually simple, very simple. So it shouldn't be hard for people when you're talking with an atheist how to explain it. It shouldn't be hard when you're trying to teach your kids how to explain it. It shouldn't be hard when you're explaining to your friends about the existence of God. And that's my aim, to make it as simple as possible, because it is simple. So I'll start with two things. I'll give an overview of atheistic arguments. What are they saying? And then I'll give proofs of God's existence, right? Because there are proofs. But you'll be the judge of that. So anyway, does God exist? I'll provide simple answers to these questions. This topic, right, it was requested by somebody called Vincent Ochola. He requested it on Twitter. There's a lady who has a Twitter handle. Its name is Juma. And she asked a question. And I responded. And Vincent thought it might be wise that I do a video on God's existence. So this is why I'm doing this video today. So anyway, just to begin on the first point, handling atheistic arguments. First, the solution is always in the problem. You have to understand it first so that you can tackle it. And to tackle an atheistic argument, you must understand first how they argue. You should understand their arguments as well. So I'll start from the point of how do they argue. And this is what I have, right? They argue by imitation, right? They imitate arguments or theories from, let's say, from the religious people, and they turn it into their own kind of theories. And I'll have examples of that. Like Occam's razor, the theory that I'm using right now, as you know, the foundation for this video. They actually say that when you see something in nature, that's the simplest explanation, leave it at that. You don't need to go further and talk about God. But again, as I'll show later, looking at things from that perspective is a bit complicated. From inwards, it's a bit simple. From your reasoning, it's a bit simple. But from the outside world, it's a bit complicated. That's what I'll show. But again, I'm trying to say that they argue by imitating. Like Occam's razor, he was a theologian. He was a Franciscan friar. and they're using his arguments to argue for the non-existence of God. And then there's the Big Bang Theory. I don't know if you know this one, but a Catholic priest actually came up with the idea of the Big Bang Theory. And then you'd see that atheists would come up and say, you guys, you don't know science. There's the Big Bang Theory. You guys keep speaking about God creating something. It was the Big Bang that brought the world into being. But that's a Catholic priest who discovered that. And who is to say that the Big Bang did not come through God, right? So again, imitation. Another imitation, they cannot stop speaking about God. Just imagine an atheistic meeting without speaking about God. What would they talk about? So they have to talk about God, because God is that important, because he exists. But I'll show that as we go. Another one is Albert Einstein. Most of them say that Albert Einstein was, they use him as an example of how atheistic scientists progress and how they are great thinkers. Albert Einstein was not an atheist. I have a specific quote from him. He's saying, I am not an atheist. So if a guy says that, we should listen, right? And if an atheist tells you that Albert Einstein is an example of how atheists are thinkers and scientists, he was not. And atheists don't have scientists. They don't have great scientists. Another one was Aristotle. You'd hear an argument that Aristotle he did not believe in anything. I will actually show that Aristotle believed in something. He believed in the gods. But they have to imitate because they don't have anything of their own. And that's a bit sad. So how else do they argue? They argue through ridicule. Like they tell you, religion is stupid. Religion came from the colonizers. Religion is backwardness. And if you notice these things, that is not an argument against the existence of God. That is just a way of making you keep quiet or feel stupid so that you won't argue further, so that you won't investigate further. It's not an argument. It's just ridiculing you into submission so that you submit that they are right because you don't want to look stupid. Another one is sensationalization. They sensationalize things, right? And when they do that, again, it's the idea of making you feel stupid or making it so, like Hitler once said, make a lie so big that people would not believe that you lie so much, that you can actually lie that big. And that's the thing of sensationalization. It becomes too big, it becomes too grand that you can't actually argue against it as a theist. One example, the flying spaghetti monster. It's an idea brought forth by some guy, some atheist, Ben Trud or something. And when you visualize that flying spaghetti monster, you kind of like get, oh, I'm done. Because now how do you start arguing against a flying spaghetti monster? And then Friedrich Nietzsche or something, he said that God is dead. So how do you start arguing that God is alive? And there's this argument that where God cannot do everything because he cannot make a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it. Again, it sounds like a ridiculous argument. The idea is to show that God cannot do everything. So he cannot make a stone so heavy that he cannot lift it. Right? And I'm hoping that the idea is to show that he cannot do that. And Christianity answers that because God created the law and then he cannot move against the law. So he handles everything. Anyway, that one is an explanation for another day. Limited philosophy. Atheists use limited philosophy to argue their cases. They give you enough information to question what you believe, but then they stop at the question. They stop at the question. They don't move further, and I call it intellectual laziness. Because yes, you have brought doubt into the equation. That's okay. But you need to move further. You need to investigate now. You need to either confirm that doubt or to confirm what you believe or to believe something else. You need to move further. You cannot stay there. An example, when you say there are too many religions so there cannot be a God. Again, that is not an argument. Because there can be too many chemistry books, but only one book teaches the right kind of chemistry. You need to investigate which is the right one. Do not be intellectually lazy. There are other stories like the flood story where they say that, the flood never happened. Noah never the world never flooded. The Babel story, they'll tell you that there is never a place where people spoke the same languages and then they departed, went away from that. And then there's the parting of the Red Sea. They'll tell you that only stupid people can believe that the sea can part. Enough information to make you question. Let's start with the Noah story. There is evidence from all over the world that a flood took place at some point in time. It wasn't at the exact time, but there is scientific evidence to show. There is scientific evidence to show that there was a significant event, a series of significant events around the world, and it was flooding, right? You go to South America, there's evidence of that. They actually have folk stories on flooding in South America. You go to Asia, they actually have folk stories on flooding in Asia. You go to Europe, the same. You go to like the Jews, where they're from the Middle East, they have stories. And what happened? These things scientifically now, when you check the rocks and all of those things, they happened over a specific period of time. It's not like one happened today and another one happened to let's say 20,000 years ago. No, they happened within, I think it's a span of 3,000 years or something. But you can confirm that. Again, intellectual laziness. These guys are afraid to confirm that. The Babel story, all the languages of the world, they came from one point. All the languages of the world, they came from one point. And people, the scientific evidence points to Africa as being the source of that one language. Because linguistically, when you check the composition of those languages, the structure, they all center around Africa. Like Africa was an epicenter for that. So the Tower of Babel story, yeah, the parting of the Red Sea, it has parted many times. It's not the first time that it has parted. And then we have to look at the definition of parting, what happened, what exactly is parting. All of the miracle at this time was that it happened when those guys were escaping. The miracle was not the parting, but when it happened. And then I think now the extent of the parting, right? But parting of the Red Sea, it's not like a new kind of thing that has never happened before. Anyway, I'm trying to say intellectual laziness. People need to go investigate further. And again, if they make you feel stupid, then you won't investigate further and you'll doubt yourself, right? And they'll imitate our arguments, theistic arguments, to argue for atheistic principles. So unless you move further and investigate where did the Big Bang Theory come from, what is Occam's razor, what is Albert Einstein's belief, what is Aristotle's belief, unless you investigate further, then you'll remain, they'll get what they want from you. So that's what I'm saying. So Francis Bacon captured this very well. He said, a little philosophy leads a man to atheism, but depth in philosophy, it will lead you to religion. And that's the truth. And I'm hoping that showing how these guys argue will tell you how they say that one of the most dangerous things in the world is the illusion of knowledge. So atheism gives you an illusion of knowledge because you become intellectually lazy. You don't move further. But when you move further, it will move you to religion, as I will show. So anyway, atheistic arguments. The first one, again, the most common one, is the problem of evil. Why does suffering exist? Why do we suffer? Right? Why will somebody die tonight? Why will somebody cry tonight? Right? Why will you feel pain? Why? If God is good, would God want you to feel pain? So that's the problem of evil. That's an argument that I think every atheist does, or posits. Then there's the lack of physical evidence. God, show yourself. Where are you? And if you can't show yourself, then why should I believe in you? So that's the lack of physical evidence. That's an argument. And just to touch on this one, everything in nature has its use, right? Everything in the world. And when people say, why is there suffering? There is an inherent assumption that suffering is not useful. That is an assumption. The second one is that suffering comes from God. So that's also an assumption. The two assumptions, right? So if suffering is useful, right, then you'd see why it exists, because it will lead to some use. And if it does not come from God, right, then you cannot blame God for it. There is St. Augustine, he once said, God judged it better to bring good out of evil rather than to allow evil not to exist. Right? So, again, there is an assumption that suffering comes from God. Let's say suffering is a form of evil. So, if evil does not come from God, it comes from somebody else. But then God finds a way of bringing good out of that evil. Then isn't he a good God? Isn't that a good person? Because he didn't want this to happen, but because somebody out of his free will cause it to happen, then what he does, he comes and brings good out of it. Isn't that a good person? Now, let's go to the other one. The lack of physical evidence, right? That God, if he cannot show himself, then he cannot exist. So I cannot believe in him. There is an assumption that the lack of evidence means that God does not exist. And then there's that common phrase, I think you know it. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I think you know it. I think we've heard it. So the fact that he does not show himself does not mean that he is not there. So that argument, it's not a sensible argument. It's an intellectually lazy argument. Let's go back to suffering. Let me ask you, without suffering, would there be triumph? Because what are you triumphing over? What is your triumph over if you have not suffered? How would you feel like you have conquered when there was nothing to conquer? Again, suffering has its uses, and God brings good out of it, even though he does not want it to be. There is compassion, right? Would there be compassion? Would we feel compassion for others if we do not see suffering, right? So suffering is there, not as per God's will, but he enables us to feel compassion so that we can end that suffering. There is the inspiration to do good. Like, let's say we know that earthquakes exist, we know that they can cause harm, we feel inspired to prevent that harm. We work towards preventing that harm. And if we spend our time doing those things instead of doing other things, then perhaps we would avert many of these dangers that are not specific to humans, that do not come from humans specifically. There's that collective human spirit where we come together. Let's say there's a famine somewhere. That collective human spirit where we do not want to see other guys suffer. So we come together to help them so that they do not suffer. Would that collective human spirit, would that community be there if suffering was not there? What if we focused on that community, that collective spirit? Would people suffer? So they suffer because somebody somewhere is not doing what they're supposed to do. We're not being a collective unit. We're not doing things in the right way. It does not come from God. But still, he enables us to feel something, to innovate, so that we can end as much suffering as possible. And that's suffering. Let's go to another one. Oh, just before we go to another one, there's another, he's called Father John Haddon, and this is what he said. The happiest people on earth are those who do not run away from their suffering. Gives you something to think about. Why would you be happy when you are when you are confronting your suffering instead of running away from it? So that means that after suffering there is something, there is happiness. Because you have conquered, because you have triumphed, because you have showed compassion, because you have innovated, and because you have felt pain for another, even though it was not your own. That collective human spirit. And that's where we find happiness. Even though a man caused that, even though we focus on other things instead of focusing on each other, that there's still some good that will come for it, because we cannot kill the good that is in us. Those who run away from suffering, those who drink, those who do drugs, those who turn to violence, are they happy? Do not run away from your suffering. Confront it. Triumph over it. It exists for a purpose. God allowed it to exist so that He can bring some good out of it. The absence of evidence. So, okay, we already know that when there's an absence of evidence, it does not mean that that thing is not there. We already know that. So, let's say God does not show Himself, right? But that does not mean He's not there. So we're kind of like in a dilemma, because we cannot prove that He's there and we cannot prove that He's not there, right? So we come to what we call justification. How do you solve a doubt? How do you justify your claim? Let's say, how do we justify that God exists even though He's not showing Himself? Right. How do you justify that He does not exist even though you cannot prove that He is not there? That He does not exist because it's not there. Anyway, so here comes the eternal argument. It's an argument between philosophy and science. Philosophy comes from the word philosophia. It means two words: philien, and sophia. Philien means to love, sophia means wisdom. So philosophy means the love of wisdom. Knowledge, I'm using science as knowledge. Sorry, right, I actually got that wrong. Science comes from the Latin word scientia, and scientia means knowledge, right? So philosophy mostly has to do with wisdom, science has to do with knowledge, mostly, right? And here's another thing. What is science? Science is just a philosophy. It's a way of thinking that having knowledge is not enough. You have to construct it in a certain way. You have to make it useful. You have to make it comprehensible. And that's where wisdom comes in. But that would mean that you have to have knowledge before you have wisdom. Is that true? And if that is true, then the one that came first, knowledge, must be greater than wisdom. But God is wisdom. So how can that be true? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom, right? So wisdom does not start from having knowledge and then constructing it in a certain way. It comes from the fear of the Lord. If you are in danger and your life is threatened, you may not know how to run away, but you know that you need to run away. You know that you need to survive. It will come to you. Same way, if you fear the Lord, the knowledge will come to you and you'll use it wisely. Because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That is where wisdom starts. It does not start from knowing. Again, it starts from God. The soul versus the body. You can pleasure the body, right? But then you might feel guilty after you pleasure it. For example, people feel guilty after having sex with somebody, a one-night stand or something. They feel guilty after having an abortion. 94% of women feel bad about having an abortion, regret having an abortion. Women should know that. People feel bad because they have homosexual tendencies. People feel bad because they want to kill their parents because now their parents are sick and they're draining their finances. People feel guilty that they want to commit suicide. So again, the reason I'm bringing this part is to find how now we can prove that God is there even though He does not show Himself, right? When you use knowledge, let's say science, something that is before you, right? Is it superior to philosophy, to reason? When you use your senses, your body, is it superior to what is within your soul? Because your soul would feel guilty even though your body is feeling pleasure. So they can be acting in an opposite kind of direction. And you might feel that pleasure is okay, but then why is your body making you feel guilty because of it? So anyway, just to run ahead. How can you justify your belief? That's the main point. You can justify through empiricism. That's the evidence of the senses. We have 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, touch. Sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. 5 of them. You can move through authoritative testimony. like an appeal to a certain authority that cannot lie. For example, Christians would appeal to the Bible, right? They say that that cannot lie. Another one is appealing to your reason, right? So that's how you can justify your claim. Through scientific evidence of the senses, through appeal to authority, or through reason, right? Now, using the Bible to argue with an atheist might not work. It might not work all the time. The best way to do is to use your reason, right? And then atheists would try to use the body, science. They would try to appeal to criteria, to their senses. Again, Occam's razor. They say that what you see in nature, that's enough. We don't need to go further, right? That's what they say, because they use their senses mostly. So in empiricism, the one where they use senses, it says that knowledge is based on experience, right? What you experience, like you experience pain, you experience something tasty, whatever, you see something. So it's based on experience. And the question begs, right? Experience has to be learned over some time. At certain times you have to do experiments, right? And all of those things. They're optical illusions. Like you might see an oasis and it's not there in the desert. When a dog, let's say a dog can hear a certain sound that you cannot hear. There can be heat, but you cannot feel it. So what happens? Can you really gain knowledge? Can you really gain knowledge using your senses only? Yes, you can, but can you do that only? Because how then would you determine optical illusions? How would you determine dog whistles? How would you determine UV heat that you cannot feel? In empiricism, knowledge is tentative and probabilistic. It is subject to continued revision and falsification. It's not dependable. For example, some people believe that the earth was flat. Today they believe that the earth was round. So can we say that when people believe that the earth was flat, it was flat? But now people believe that the world is round, it is now round. We cannot say that. So the way we gain knowledge cannot be through our senses, because our senses can lie. They can be manipulated. We have to do experiments for them. It is too much to rely on them. Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. We cannot rely on them. Again, now we can move to reason, rationalism, right? Where our chief source of knowledge is reason. We only reason. And you find, and science is, as again, science is it's philosophy. So you can actually reason it into, science is actually a branch of reason or something of that sort. So anyway, when people argue philosophy against science, science is within philosophy. Like scientific evidence, those experiments, they are within reason. So reason is the higher, sort of like, it's higher than depending on your senses. So anyway, we can say that you can depend on reason alone. So the question I'm asking is, yeah, do plants reason? Do animals reason? What pushes them forward? What propels them to do certain kinds of things? If they do not reason, if the plants do not reason, what pushes them forward? For example, animals do not commit suicide, they do not commit murder, right? They kill for food. They will wait until the end. They won't jump over a cliff to end their suffering. They will wait until the end. They did not reason, yet they do things that are reasonable. As humans, we reason, but we do things that are not reasonable. Like we commit murder. So there must be something else that is pushing guys towards doing things in a reasonable way other than reason itself. But I'll touch on that. I'm hoping that I'm just about to be through. I think I've gone long today. So just to go to Thomas Aquinas, and this is what he said. There's the argument of the unmoved mover, right? That where you're standing on, it's a foundation. That foundation is standing on the earth. The earth is standing in a gravitational pull around the sun. The sun is moving within a galaxy. And we're actually moving. The galaxy is actually moving at a very fast pace. The universe is expanding. Everything is moving. But for something to stand, like for us to stand on this earth, right? There must be something that we cannot move, and that's the unmovable object. Because if it moves, then we move with it. If it sinks, we sink with it. But the earth is not sinking. That's enabled us to stand, right? So anyway, the argument is this, that whenever, since everything is moving, including the universe, and everything that we observe is moving, there's one thing that does not move, and that holds everything together. It holds everything together. And what is that thing, if not God? This is what Aristotle said. Remember, those guys were saying that Aristotle does not believe in anything, but again, they are imitators. Aristotle believes in something. He said this, that the unmovable object, it has to be eternal. It has to be eternal. Because if it's not eternal, then it means that if it dies, then what keeps things from not sinking or from not falling apart? It has to be eternal so that it can hold everything together, because it's the only thing that cannot move. Like, we've been here for, I think, 50,000 years, humans. The earth has been here for billions of years. The earth has been longer than us for here, and it was able to sustain the dinosaurs. It was able to sustain humans. It can sustain everything because it's kind of eternal. It's not eternal, but it's kind of eternal, right? Infinite. It exists, yeah, infinite time, and it cannot be composed of matter. It cannot be the same as us, right? Because the earth is not built like humans are built. The universe is not built like the way the earth is built. Our galaxy is not built the way the universe, as in, we can't be the same. Because if you're the same, then it means that if you're of the same matter, then it means that it has characteristics that we have. That immovability is still in it. But anyway, so that's what Aristotle said. The argument of the unmoved mover, that there's something that cannot be moved, and it's holding everything together. Again, intellectual laziness. Atheists will tell you that, everything, they won't ask you to go and investigate, like the earth is moving, everything is moving. They won't do that. They just prefer it when you believe that, nothing is moving. And so everything is moving. And there's only one thing that holds it together, that does not move. There's one thing that is unshakable. That is why everything is able to stand on it. I'll leave it at that. Okay, the argument of the first cause. There's something that sets everything in motion. That is God. There's the argument from contingency. Cars do not have to exist for there to be for us to move from place to place. We do not have to exist for the earth to be there. The earth does not have to exist for the universe to be there. And it goes back. The universe does not have to exist. It does not have to exist. Why does it have to exist? There is one thing that brought everything into place, and that is the only thing that has to exist, and that is God. The only thing that has to exist is God. Everything else does not have to exist, and since everything else does not have to exist, then it means the one thing that exists, that has to exist, it brought everything else into being. The argument of the final end, like, we eat so that we can eat so that we can be strong in all of those things. We try to survive so that we can have children and all of those things. The next generation can come forward. Animals do not reason. Plants do not reason. So why are they trying to survive? What is pushing them to survive? What is pushing them to produce? What is pushing animals to protect the young? Why would an elephant see the carcass of a rhino and move and then cover that carcass? Why would he do that? Why would an antelope save a fellow antelope from a lion? What is pushing them towards that? There is something that is pushing them. For us, we call it the eternal law. There is something within us, every living thing that is within us, that even without reason, a baby would cry when something bad happens. When his mother is crying or something of that sort. When he sees blood, when he would cry, yet he does not know, he does not reason as yet. There is something within that pushes things. There's the argument from degree. For example, there is somebody who speaks a bit of truth. There's somebody who speaks a lot of truth. There is somebody who has the truth. I am the truth, the way, and the life. Remember Jesus, he has the truth. But anyway, there is always somebody who's more beautiful than the other. So who is that person who is perfectly beautiful? There is somebody who is always stronger than the others. Who is that person who is always the strongest? Again, simple explanations. We see beautiful people, we always see beautiful people are more beautiful than others. There's somebody who's the most beautiful, who's the most perfect, who has the truth. A perfect being, a supreme being, God. Proof of design. Okay, these are not Thomas Aquinas theories, these are other ones now. Proof of design. Like the earth is incredible. Like, who put it together? We have to sit down, talk, design computers and everything for me to do this, for you to listen, for you to share this video. We have to do all of those things. So who was the one who designed everything? Who designed the universe and designed the galaxy and designed our earth to have an atmosphere and designed our earth to have gravitational pull, designed our earth to have like an atmosphere, like the weather, designed our bodies, designed how we'll breathe in oxygen and breathe out oxygen, designed how we'll procreate. Who did this? All of these things. So that's the intelligent design. There has to be an intelligent being from something real. And so that's the idea, that everything you imagine comes from something real. I hope that I've helped. Again, the simplest answer to this question, to a question, is the correct